Have you ever wondered what it would be like in the future for digital services in the airline industry? Now, the way I look at it is that the airline industry is always one of the most progressive as far as digital transformation. A lot of things are happening, a lot of things are becoming digitized, and technology is being used, and there are a lot of benefits that are happening. Nevertheless, the way I see it is that we are compromising what I call emotional values, and I'll explain what functional and emotional values is later on. But if you look at a service right now, you'll see that it is geared towards functionality, and what I mean by that is saving money and saving time. So if you look at this, the way service machines are set up in the airport, the luggage check-in machines are also set up in a way that always saves time. There's less queues and there's less lines. And in a way, the service provider is saving money, and in return, the tickets are being reduced. The prices of the tickets are being reduced. Now, that's not a bad thing. What concerns me is when these airline companies are now trying to compete, because the way things are happening right now is that too many airlines are becoming too similar. These services are becoming too similar. So where is the competition? How can I differentiate from one service to the other? And that is where we go back to the emotional values that were once very prominent when we had live human agents, where a human agent was able to interact with the customer. No, without them probably explaining too much, without the customer explaining too much, the human agent was able to understand the situation, provide access, reduce anxiety. And this scenario that we are living in, especially today, it seems like that is not available. But that's not exactly a bad thing, because I still believe what I say in my hypothesis is that I believe that there is still a way for digital services to provide these kind of values. It's inevitable that we're not going to have more human agents, but why not have these digital services improve to the point where they can provide emotional values? Let me explain what emotional values are real quick. One of the two most prominent emotional values that I'm focusing on is providing access and reducing anxiety. What I mean by providing access is knowing what kind of service needs to be provided during the time of need. We don't know what's going to happen during an airline journey, especially when there's a connection flight, especially when there are other services and other companies that are involved within the journey, right? So providing access is very important. Providing access, the way I see providing access, is providing the right kind of service or the right kind of choices at the time of need. That's providing access. Reducing anxiety is pretty much linked. So these kind of problems that we face during an airline journey gets us quite upset, right? There's a lot of anxiety and stress that happens during these journeys, and especially if you are trying to connect and there's like a small window of time, and or the gates are too far or whatever it is. And so reducing anxiety is something that was something that was not very difficult for a human agent to do. But in these times, I believe that the responsibility of providing access and reducing anxiety lays in the digital service that we're interacting with. My hypothesis says that there is an answer, and there's a lot of possibilities and positive issues as well with AI. And what I mean by AI is that AI that works behind the what I call back-end service. So try not to think robots and try not to think chatbots, but think about all these services that AI is doing behind what the customer can see. And that's what I'm focusing on, and I believe AI has a lot of potential in that manner. So let's explore in these few upcoming videos on how AI would possibly be able to provide emotional values. The first step that needs to be taken in order to provide emotional values within services is to know what is the emotional state of the customer. So sensors. And what I mean by multimodal analysis is when you have sensors from different types of areas that are able to detect the emotional state of a customer. And with this sensor fusion, you are able to get more frequency with the data and more accurate data from different types of areas that are going to give you a better quality as far as results. So to put this in perspective, think of a cabin, whether a car cabin or an airline cabin, and think of a customer and think of how many different ways we can sense these emotions from a customer. One can be facial sensors, the other one can be audio, sound, physiological sensors that can measure the heartbeat, for example. So when we put these different areas together, we are able to know what kind of emotions the customer might be going through, and then cross-correlate that with what we call historical data. And historical data is simply what the customer has been going through or what the customer is facing. So perhaps a delay or a cancellation or something happened within the journey that is making the customer unhappy. And we can also compare that with another customer that might be playing a game that customer might have higher heart rate or something like that. So with having these multiple areas of sensors, we're able to give accurate results of, oh, does this customer need our attention? Maybe this customer does not need our attention. And therefore, with multimodal analysis, we get a better outcome and we can have a better prediction. There are a lot of challenges that we can face when we think of placement or what kind of sensors to use within the cabin experience. Now, the first thing that we can think about if we want to capture facial recognition or movement or sound is where do these sensors go on each seat throughout the entire cabin? So ethical issues will arise. There are probably 300 passengers that are not related to each other, all of them. And basically the environment is a lot less personalized than, let's say, a car vehicle. So if we look at the automotive industry, we'll see that these kind of research and collecting data within the passenger for autonomous driving, for example, is somewhat attainable because you can have consent of one person or of two people. But with an airline company that has it's public transportation after all, these challenges will be quite difficult for a researcher to face. The other challenge is what do the airline company, the regulations in airline companies, what do they allow and what are they unable to allow? And what do they want to know and what do they not want to know? So it's not really up to the researcher only. You're dealing with a very large entity that has a established organization and it deals with probably governments and a lot of these different bodies that you have to address when you come to want to think about installing sensors for the sake of the customer. So it's not as easy to personalize or to put sensors for the sake of emotional values within the cabin experience. The other challenge is what do you do with that kind of information? Let's say everything went well and you have all of this data and it's accurate. But, well, it's somewhat accurate. It can never be completely accurate. But you have this multimodal areas of data that you are quite satisfied with and you can do something with it. But how do you address it and how do you make benefits of these features that you have? And what do you do in a situation if the readings are giving you that the customer is tired, or that most customers are tired or quiet? The attendants are not being as engaging. Is how do you act upon this? Maybe it is the right time not to be engaging. Maybe it is the time that you want passengers to be quiet or not engaging as well. So how do you act on this is quite complicated, and it's quite a challenge. But as researchers, we like to kind of think of if everything goes well, the things that we can actually do. So putting all of these things aside, and let's say we have the capability of doing that, there are a lot of areas within the cabin experience that we can actually collect data without really having to cross so much ethical issues. The first thing would be sound, and what I mean by sound is detecting the level of sound rather than what conversations or what is being said. So there are sensors to the level of sensors to see how much the passengers are being social or not. Just that one variable would be quite valuable on its own. The other sensors can be chemical imbalance. So there are a lot of sensors within the cabin experience to begin with, but another one can be a chemical imbalance. So there are sensors that can sense the chemical imbalance within the human body. So it can give you a general idea of what is the mood of the entire cabin, and that can be an area where the ethical procedures of it won't be as difficult as cameras and facial recognitions and conversation. So that is another. There are. What I'm trying to say here is that there are sensors that we can work with that we don't have to face so much issues with the regulations. Motion detection is another one. Perhaps there can be motion detection on how much the passenger is moving or not, and of course we would kind of that can be beneficial to know if the passenger is they have good blood circulation going on. But then again, there's always these ethical issues that come, and these challenges will always be a part of research. At the beginning of the video, I mentioned how it is important for AI not to be annoying and not to be something that is undesirable by the customer. And I believe the way that this can happen is when AI is trying too hard to play the role of a human. And customers are smart. Customers know that there is more trust with an employee. Customers choose companies according to how much trust they have. So when you place these AI interactions as part of a human-like interaction, it becomes somewhat questionable, and that's where the annoying part comes in. I spoke about how AI has a lot of potential when it is in the background, and that is what AI augmented service is. AI works in the background and is able to calculate and is able to, we've mentioned all of these sensors and all this data that we are capable of perhaps collecting. AI, the way that it can improve and the way that it can develop to provide emotional values is taking these data, this data that we've collected, or these sensors that these sensors have collected, placing them together and making sense out of them, but not overpowering the customer, always being in the background and always perhaps suggesting to the customer and the service provider. It goes both ways, letting the customer know that I've noticed that this and this is happening. Is this correct? If this is correct, can I suggest this to you? And in that sense, the customer is able to be empowered and also know the value of their interaction with this digital service. So do I give time to interact with this digital service? Do I trust giving this information to this service? And the more these non-overpowering interactions are happening, the more the customer knows, first of all, the value that they're putting into the interaction that they're doing, and the possible benefit that they're going to have in the future. To place this in perspective, let's say there's a delay. And the more I put information, or the more the AI background AI knows my historical data, knows where I need to get to, and it's not just, by the way, connecting to another flight. It's also connecting to a meeting on the other end. So that can also be a place within the input of the digital process that's going on. And when this information is there, and when something happens, and what I spoke about providing access, and when something happens, and when you need it's a time of need, and you need access at this point, that AI is going to be able to provide suggestions and not overtake, just provide suggestions. And in that sense, when time is of importance, the user is able to collect from, let's say, I don't know, 3 choices, rather than going through an entire new setup of searching for other solutions and doing all of these digital graphical input, is what we call it, that is more manual. So in that sense, AI augmented service has a lot of potential to provide these emotional values we spoke about. So we spoke about the values of AI augmented services, and how when a customer is able to see these kind of this data that they're giving, they're able to see the value of it, they're more inclined to have more interactions, and to be able to provide more data to that kind of service. Sophisticated agency takes it to a step beyond that. And what I mean by that is that the customer is not only able to know what type of data they're giving, or to consent or to see the value of the data that they're giving out on, but they're also able to control the kind of interaction and the kind of level of assistance that they're getting from the AI. So they can gauge it. If a customer, let's say there are several types of archetypes of customers. Some customers are okay with this kind of AI, or let's say AI assistance. Some are not. Or maybe you're at a position that you are in need of this kind of extroverted AI interference or assistance. And sometimes you're not. You want to know everything on your own. You're able to gauge that. So that, again, is another step of empowering the customer to control what AI can do. And again, I'd like to also mention this important aspect, is that now the customer knows that this is what AI is capable of doing. The customer knows that this is AI that is managing and giving these kind of values. So in that sense, the AI here is definitely not in an annoying position anymore. It's not this character, or it's not this chatbot, or it's not this robot that is trying to be something that they're not, at least not yet. That they're not trying to be of the same kind of human agency, is what I'm trying to say, when they are actually, AI is nowhere near that. But if we think of AI again as a back-end service, then yes, there is a lot of potential, and the amount of data that the AI can process in the background is far more than any other human. So that alone on its own is something that the customer, if the customer is informed on these kind of aspects, then the customer is perhaps would be again inclined to share that kind of service, and they would be happy to kind of put that data out, because they know the value that's going to come out, and they know that they can also stop that kind of interaction if it comes at a time that they don't want it. So that is what I mean by sophisticated agency and the empowerment of control for the customer. So we spoke about how it is important to let both the customer and the service provider know about the values that they're getting when they are sharing data, or when they're these sensors that are detecting emotions and feeding data to a model, why this is important, why these values can be useful in the future. But the question here is, what are the type of things that can happen in the future, or why is it very important to have that kind of AI interaction or AI calculations that are happening in the background in the future? The way I see it is that in the future, well, even now, we're facing more of this these integrations of services. So it's not just one service that we're dealing with when we're flying. We're dealing with several services and several airlines sometimes, right? Within one journey. I can name many aspects that can be involved within one journey, and I'm not just going to say transportation, but if we had to pick transportation, then we would look at the train, and we would look at the shuttle, and we would look at the tram and subways, and then the flight, and then the airport, and then all of these things. So all of these connections and all of these companies are separate. They're not one company. And what AI and what historical data is doing, and what you giving consent to give this kind of data, in the future, when there is very highly valuable services that AI can do in the background, that kind of consent will be justified. So that kind of AI interaction that's happening in the background is able to calculate, is able to give you a better reading, is able to just let you know about, hey, we don't, the AI agency or the AI model is not, it's telling you you're not going to be able to make this flight. Even if you run across the entire airport real fast, you're not going to be able to make it. So why go through that trouble? Because the AI is calculating where the gate is, AI is doing all of these things that even sometimes a human agent cannot do on the spot. So all of these things are very inevitable in the future. They're happening right now, but they're going to be getting more and more, especially when airports are dealing with higher number of passengers and higher number of airlines. This kind of interaction and this kind of value that AI is going to give in the future is very valuable. And if we right now start working towards that type of interaction, improvement, and development within this, within these values that AI can give, that are within the realm of emotional value, providing access and reducing anxiety, then digital interactions can actually provide both of these functional values and emotional values without really having the need of having a human agent always around. Now, I'm a firm believer that no service can be entirely smooth without having a human agent around. But what I'm trying to say is that this kind of augmented AI service will empower a human agent as well. They're going to give information to the human agent and the employee to take the right action again, right? So it's not the AI that's taking over. It's always the human that is taking control. And if we go back to the examples I gave within the cabin experience and what to do within a situation, the AI can provide information to the attendant and the staff, and the staff can take the right control. So it's always a human decision at the end of the day. So AI is basically augmenting and helping within situations in the future where it is going to be necessary to have AI calculating for you, because there's just going to be an enormous amount of data that someone or some kind of machine needs to process and empower the user to take the right choice. And at the end, I'd like to talk about AI and how it can create emotional intelligence. And what I mean by that is that the more we have this kind of research that promotes dialogue between the customer and the digital process, and not just the graphical input, and not just like, choosing one A or B. It's more of a dialogue. And I spoke about how the background AI is trying to understand what the customer is going through. So they're asking them questions, and the customer is answering questions back to know what emotional state they're in, and how to provide the right solution. By doing that on its own, the customer is then able to know what kind of emotional state they're in, or a lot of times participants actually don't even know why they're feeling so and so, or why are they um, or how to define what they're going through. And if you can't define the kind of emotions they're going through, then you can't solve it. So in a way, when you're having that dialogue, whether the AI agency is doing a great job by providing you with a good solution, or if it's not, that's not really the issue. The issue is that you are going through a dialogue of knowing what kind of emotions you're feeling at the moment. So you can actually also, as a customer, they're going to be able to also be aware the level of anxiety they have, and kind of provide solutions for themselves if the AI agent is not able to provide the best of solutions. So that kind of research and that kind of digital interaction that we're probably not used to, and to have that kind of interaction that has emotional values as a goal, will provide value within the process of within the process alone, will provide value to the customer, in my opinion. And I would like to leave you with that. Thank you.